One of the most exciting periods in European history is the era known as the Renaissance during the 15th and 16th centuries. Renaissance is a French word meaning rebirth. The term is used to apply to this period because it was characterized by a rebirth of interest in learning, art, and literature. Also, as compared to the dormant Middle Ages, Europe during the Renaissance seemed to experience a tremendous forward leap in material and political progress. Europe seemed to be undergoing a new birth, which would eventually lead to a new age of prosperity in human history. In the 14th and 15th centuries, learning revived in Western Europe. The modern world was beginning. The light area on the map indicates the areas which were known to the geographers at that time. You can see that a good deal of the continent of Asia is included in this area. During the Crusades, European warriors returned from battles in Asia Minor with many of the products of the Far East, including silks and spices. Gradually, a demand for these Oriental goods became felt in Europe, leading to the establishment of regular markets and trade routes to the East. The role which Eastern trade played in contributing to the Renaissance must not be neglected. Just as important were certain political and social reforms which had taken place in different parts of Europe. In England, the Magna Charta of 1215 had laid the basis for modern trial by jury. English barons revolted against King John and defeated his armies. They told him that he would be deposed unless he signed the Charter of Freedoms which they had drawn up. Since he had no choice, King John reluctantly signed the Magna Charta. On the field of Runnymede, he could no longer imprison a nobleman without a trial, in which the jury was composed of the nobleman's peers. The establishment of Parliament in 1295 gave new meaning to self-government. It was no longer possible for the king to make all of the decisions relating to foreign policy and domestic taxation without first consulting Parliament. Over the centuries, Parliament was gradually to replace the legislative authority of the king, leading to the establishment of the constitutional monarchy under which England is governed today. Another important change in the social structure of Europe was the gradual liberation of the serfs. Serfs bought their freedom and land from the barons and marketed their own crops. During the Middle Ages, the serfs had been, for all practical purposes, slaves. They could not leave the estate on which they were born, and they were required to work on the land of their lord until they died. As the feudal system became less and less necessary, serfs began freeing themselves and setting up small farms of their own, independent from the estates of the nobility. Plows, hoes, and drills improved methods of agriculture. Crops were rotated. No longer was the same field planted with the same crop year after year. Farmers had come to realize that such a system eventually exhausted the soil. They began to leave fields fallow or unplanted every few years, and then to alternate the types of crops which were planted in each field. The improved tools, plus the improved agricultural methods, could have only a beneficial result. Farm production went up. Famine became a much rarer occurrence. New ideas and inventions brought about many changes in homes and business. Cities became centers for the dispersion of new products and ideas. Markets were set up, which were visited by buyers from rural areas. These markets sold new inventions, new types of textiles, and the exotic products brought from the East. The desire for more trade opened up new water routes and improved navigation. The compass, a Chinese invention, was utilized by European ship pilots to chart their courses with more accuracy. Also, the sextant and the astrolabe were invented, thereby making navigation by the stars and sun possible. The Italian cities of Venice and Genoa became the chief trading centers of Europe because of their monopoly on Eastern trade. With new wealth at their disposal, The cities of Italy began to sponsor important developments in art, literature, architecture, music, and science. Alchemists, in trying to change common metals into gold, discovered many scientific facts. They sought to produce the philosopher's stone, a substance which would transform lead into pure gold. They were, of course, never successful in producing this substance, but they did learn a great deal about common chemicals and chemical reactions, which eventually led to the establishment of modern chemistry. From the Chinese, Europe learned to make paper, and this became a major industry. Up to this time, Europeans depended on parchment for their paper, which was produced from sheepskin. The supply of parchment was limited, and it was not possible to produce books on a large scale. However, when the Chinese method of paper production out of vegetable matter was imported to Europe, paper could be produced cheaply and in large quantities. The stage was set for the invention of one of the most important machines in human history. In 1456, Gutenberg's press, using movable type, provided a cheap method of printing. The invention of the printing press made it possible to produce hundreds of copies of a book in a short time. The medieval method of copying books by hand was now obsolete. Libraries could be established outside the walls of the monasteries, and learning could become much more widespread. When Caxton printed books in English, reading spread to people who did not know Latin. All during the Middle Ages, study, reading, and writing was done only in Latin. The local speech of each country was not considered sophisticated enough to treat with learned subjects, nor did writers care to compose literary works in any language other than Latin, because they considered the vernacular or common spoken language too crude for good literature. This tendency began to be reversed when the medieval Italian Dante composed his great work, The Divine Comedy, in Italian. Others followed his example, and one of the most important advances made during the Renaissance was the development of a great vernacular literature, which was accessible to people who knew little or no Latin. Newspapers and pamphlets were printed and reached more people. Topics of public interest could be printed and distributed. Learning became a thing within the reach of the ordinary man. A greater percentage of the population learned to read because printed material in a language they understood was now available. The printing press revived interest in the culture of ancient Greece and Rome. During the Middle Ages, the Latin classics were read and studied to some degree, but Greek was almost totally unknown. Renaissance scholars read all of the Latin classics intensely, and they took up the study of the Greek language so that they could read the great classics of ancient Greece without aid of a translation. This resulted in a tremendous expansion of knowledge. Writers in the vernacular began to use the Latins and Greeks for their models, and produced literary works which were strongly influenced by the best of the ancient classics. Once more, Rome became a center of arts and letters. New theories of painting and sculpture were developed, particularly in Italy, where classical studies were predominant. In literature, Italy produced such famous figures as Petrarch, Boccaccio, and Ariosto. In art and sculpture, Italy produced the Renaissance masters Botticelli, Raphael, and Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci, an engineer and artist, invented tools, built canals, and drew plans for a flying machine. In addition, he painted masterpieces such as the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. During the Renaissance, it was believed that a truly intelligent person should excel in all fields of endeavor. Scientist, writer, and artist, Leonardo da Vinci exemplifies, perhaps better than any other person, the 16th century ideal of the Renaissance man, who was accomplished in many different fields. Another such figure was the great Italian artist Michaelangelo. Michaelangelo was a great painter and sculptor. This is his famous Pieta. It was Michelangelo also who carved the massive statue of the young David, which now stands in the city of Florence, and the masterful statue of Moses, which is in one of Rome's churches. Excelling in many fields, Michelangelo wrote beautiful sonnets still read and studied today, and it was he who designed most of the architectural plans for St. Peter's in Rome, the central cathedral of the Roman Catholic Church. Michelangelo is as well known for his paintings as for his sculpture. The roof of the Sistine Chapel in Rome was painted entirely by Michelangelo. Sculptor, painter, writer, and architect, Michelangelo stands as another great example of the Renaissance man. Of course, Italy was not the only center in which art and literature reached a new height of perfection. A great artistic flowering also occurred in France, Germany, Spain, and England. In London, Shakespeare's plays marked the beginnings of the modern theater. Written during the late 16th and early 17th centuries, Shakespeare's plays represent the pinnacle of dramatic art in the English language. Although they generally are overshadowed by Shakespeare's greatness, the writers Ben Jonson and Christopher Marlowe should also be remembered as two of England's greatest literary figures. In France, the Renaissance produced great writers such as Montaigne, Rabelais, and Ronsard. Renaissance literature throughout Europe was characterized by interest in the ancient classics, freshness in viewpoint, optimism, and order. And Renaissance advances in scientific knowledge were just as important as the new literary productions. Copernicus, father of astronomy, increased man's knowledge of the universe. This Polish astronomer made extensive observations of the motion and position of the heavenly bodies. He recorded and compiled his observations and reached many new and important conclusions about planetary motion. His studies became available to other European astronomers and represented a major advance in the development of the science of astronomy. Galileo opened the heavens to man with his invention of the telescope. With his telescope, this 16th century Italian astronomer could observe much more carefully the planets, the moon, and the stars. After years of patient study, Galileo reached a startling new conclusion. Galileo proved that the earth and other heavenly bodies move around the sun. Up to this time, it was believed that the sun and planets revolved around the earth. This was the Ptolemaic system of astronomy, which had been set up nearly 2,000 years before. With one stroke, Galileo disproved the Ptolemaic system, but his theory was not accepted by most people until 100 years after Galileo's death. In this age, man began to question what they were told and to observe facts carefully. As we all know, the first step to discovery is questioning. The Renaissance was the great age for questioning and reevaluating the knowledge which had come down from the past. It is largely for this reason that it was the age for so many important advances and discoveries. Let us pause now and see how much we remember from what we have just seen and heard. Here are 5 contributions which the Renaissance gave to the world. One of these contributions was not made during the Renaissance. See if you can spot it. Here are the choices. 1. Protection of rights through law. 2. Feudal system. 3. Printing press, books, and pamphlets. 4. Growth of learning through literature, art, and science. 5. Development of new industries. Did you notice which one of these was not a Renaissance contribution? Let's see if you were correct in your choice. Contributions of Renaissance. 1. Protection of rights through law. 2. Parliament and representative government. 3. Printing press, books, pamphlets. 4. Growth of learning through literature, art, and science. 5. Development of new industries. You now see that the second item in the first list was not a Renaissance contribution. The feudal system was developed during the Middle Ages, but the Renaissance was notable in that it produced parliament and representative government. Political advances are one of the major reasons why the Renaissance was so important in the development of our modern world.